So we want to welcome everyone to our uh, June the 13th meeting of the Dochartaigh Clann Association, our Zoom meeting. And we're really lucky today with our presentation. I'm really interested in it. Just as a beginning, I want to remind everybody of our upcoming classes. Next month, we're going to have Irish Simple Fare with Marie Doherty and Rosie Doherty Grammar sharing with us about food and traditions around food. And then August's meeting is in Ireland at the Gathering from August 12th to 15th, based in Culdaff in Ashowan. And we're also going to have the capacity for people to join our gathering through a virtual ticket too. So there'll be more information about that. But we're just so excited to have all of you with us today. And I'm going to initially turn the time over to Mike to introduce Zach.
Well, hello, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Michael Lacapo. So yes, I have an Italian name and an Irish, one of the board members of the Irish Association. My maternal grandfather was a Doherty, so that makes this important to me. And our speaker today is Zach Doherty. Even though we both share a surname, I think we connect like 1300s, 1200s, like so, which Zach will explain to you why we know that and how we can figure that out. Because as a clan, we're very, very big. And as you get past genealogical timeframes or with the difficulties of Irish research, Y-DNA can be very important. And as a professional genealogist, I work a lot with Zach, but I let him do all the dirty work. So with no further ado, we have Zach Doherty, who's the project administrator for the Doherty Y-DNA project. It's all yours.
Thank you both. Let me take over the screen here. Okay, let me just get rid of this. All right, thank you everyone for coming along, joining. I had given a talk back in May, so almost about a year ago on this. So just trying to cover some of the things I would like to work on and take the project, in different places and so forth, but also reintroduce to some people or introduce for the first time what we're doing, why we're focusing on Y-DNA for some of this work. So there's three main questions. Why test Y-DNA, for example? What does it reveal? Why do we emphasize it to some degree? Again, it's not the only tool in the toolbox, but it can be a very beneficial one. Where does this project stand? Right now, it stands at about 671 men that are Y-DNA tested that are project members. That represents many different lineages. But again, we all associate or identify with the surname itself, even regardless of all the variants that we might possess in our names. And then I also want to get into the topic of how can we maybe bridge some gaps in our genealogy where the documentation or the genealogical trail runs cold, and how can Y-DNA then get us into like seeing different things, aspects like possibly geography of where our immigrants might have actually resided based on the matches we produce. If you guys want to, of course, visit and go back to the last talk, it's at the Dochartaigh Clann Association Facebook page, or sorry, YouTube channel, I should say, rather, that has that talk where I go into more depth about like looking at your FTDNA, which is family tree DNA results through the different pages and screenshots and so forth. Today, I'm not going to get into that too much. So mostly just talking about Y-DNA testing again, the groups we've been able to form, and where I'd like to try to take this into the future. So surnames, for most of the many European cultures, I should say, the surname generally will pass father to son. Now, if you go far enough back in time, surnames weren't a thing because populations weren't that dense. You would have, for example, John John who lived by the woods, let's say, and he would just be called after a while John by the woods or Atwood. That's sort of like an example of like someone that was being identified by a certain feature. But obviously, at some point along the way, that name stuck. And that's sort of how essentially surnames came to be, but they weren't always something that we've had thousands of years in the past. They're generally in a lot of the European cultures, there's something that could maybe go back at most 800 to 1,000 years, some cases a little bit further. But in some cultures, for example, like Scandinavian cultures, they might be very recent that they started to solidify into certain surnames. So what's very beneficial about Y DNA is the Y chromosome travels the same path as that surname inheritance, which makes it a very potent tool in the toolbox for tracking some of your patrilineal ancestry. So the one benefit of Y DNA is, again, it tracks down that one line, but unlike autosomal DNA, it doesn't dilute over the generations. It is always 100% passed on, father to son, so on and so forth, with very slow mutations along the way. And those mutations kind of serve as like strong anchor points for us to then piece together lineages and when they might converge together on that unique ancestral line. And with that, there's two different aspects of Y DNA that we test. There's the fast-changing Y STRs, single tandem repeats, and then the slow mutating near permanent Y SNPs, which we'll get into further in a little bit. So there's two cases, and I could explain which one I fall into. I'm probably, well, obviously in the diaspora buckets, if you want to call it that. So I had a Doherty ancestor come over at some point into colonial US. And with that, of course, my brick wall only goes up to him. I'm not able to say exactly where in Ireland he was from, but I'm of that diaspora where I had an Irish ancestor come over sometime in the probably late 18th century, late 1700s, let's say. So if you're in the diaspora, a reason to test would be you could see if you join the rather large RBY471. I'll explain what that is in a little bit, which is our largest genetically related Doherty group, or any of the other dozen unique Dochartaigh genetic groups that we've discovered through our Y project. Each one is very important, and I'm always glad to see when we have new projects join, regardless of what group they end up falling into. Because again, we all identify with being a Dochartaigh. We're all part of the clan. So when you do test, you can discover genetic cousins across the continents. Like we'll see cases where they'll brick wall in the United States, they'll do a Y DNA test, and lo and behold, they're actually somewhat closely matching, at least as recent as the last 200 years, some people that never left Ireland that have tested there, which can serve as a potential clue on doing further genealogy research. And again, that's the case with so many of us, and I'm one of those cases. It's like the paper trail ends in the 1700s or 1800s, so that those connections of the genetic certainty of Y DNA matching some of those men could be like, okay, well, that opens up a new avenue. I never explored this new area. Let's go take a look at that. Why would you test if you're in the bucket of Irish based? We could also have Eva explain this at some point, but she has a bunch of different Doherty ancestors on her various lines that she exhaustively tested. And she was quite tickled to find out that a couple of them that didn't think that they were related in any way actually were. Now, granted, it would probably be about like the 1600s or the 1700s, so it's before the brick walls of either of those lines of hers, but it's quite interesting to find out that they were related. So some people get a real benefits out of that, at least that knowledge. But they also, these Irish testers serve as what I would get into later as map anchor points for some of us diaspora. Again, if we match closely to some of these men, well, that could give us a good clue of where we might have come from out of Ireland. So that's the benefit of having testers on both fronts and growing this type of project. One of the clusters that's rather large. The reason we emphasize it so much is just because it's the majority of the project in terms of the sheer number of testers that seem to fall into this bucket is this RBY471 genetic cluster. What's interesting, and there are other surname projects outside of Doherty that kind of focus on this a little bit, is that they'll start to try to tie some of these surname groups into or see how well they correlate with the medieval Irish manuscripts, which again, you got to take those with a slight grain of salt because they were being authored much further, what am I going to say, much more recent in time than when those events occurred. So you might pretty much assume that sometimes some of those things, some of these connections might have been fabricated potentially back then for political gain and so forth. But actually, we're starting to see that there is a decent correlation with some of these kinships associations of these surnames, such as O'Donnell, O'Boyle, O'Doherty. They are mostly all converging on a Y SNP called DF97, which sits right above the BY471 Y SNP. So they are, in fact, showing some of these connections to be somewhat true on these early medieval manuscripts. So it's quite exciting. And I would say for anyone that's interested in that sort of thing, there's this Dalcune surname project. Well, it's not a surname project. It's more like a group project that looks at the connections of these surname clusters in Northern Ireland. So that's quite an interesting read on where they're showing some of these other surnames, like how the McLaughlins tie in to the Dohertys, where they tie in genetically on the Y chromosome. It's pretty cool stuff. But again, a lot of work needs to be done with that to give it a bit more academic rigor moving forward. So expectations when you Y-DNA test. There's a chance that you might not fall into the genetic group that you might think you're going to fall into. And there's been some actual research. It's actually been on Italian pedigrees, believe it or not, but that where they come away with a 1 to 2% chance of some type of surname or DNA switch. So regardless of how that happened, it could be adoption, fosterage, remarriage, informal name changes. But that statistically, that's usually what it falls at, is a 1 to 2% chance every generation that something occurs where the surname you inherited was not the one that your Y chromosome, is associated with. Now, if you do the math on like when the one of the earliest progenitors, and actually this might be a little bit more recent, this 850 CE, because I think the supposed first Dochartaigh might have lived in 700 CE. But if you run out the estimate of how many generations that could be from that individual living back then to a 1950 born test taker today, you would run at a rate of 31 to 52% chance that you would have just a single one of these surname or DNA switches. Now that's just for one chance that could have happened a couple times on the same line. So when you're going that far back, there's always a chance that you had one of these events. And again, regardless if that happens, you're still a Doherty because it's what you identify with. So with surnames like, for example, Smith or whatnot, they're usually occupational, and you would expect that sort of mix where none of them are related very often doing this type of DNA. O'Doherty has got kind of a unique origin in that it seems to be mostly a single origin surname. So we do see, again, this BY471 dated around 700 CE, sort of correlating well with when this early progenitor was said to have lived. But again, regardless of how the surname came into your line, there's any opportunities for one of these surname switches to happen along the way. Just a quick refresher over what I presented before this time last year, but I don't want to get too much in the weeds, is the common type of tests that we take for Y-DNA are the Y-STRs I mentioned before and Y-SNPs. And the entry level point is a Y37, where it looks at 7 of these STR markers. And with that, I'm usually able as an admin to help a project member work out, are you matching this subgroup or this subgroup or this one? So it helps me sort of see what's in your immediate orbit. It's more or less more recent matches. It can go far back, but I mean, the more these STR matches align with one another between test takers, the more recent they shared a common ancestor. With that, though, if you jump up to 111 markers, that's just more granularity, more resolution in the test. So it helps sharpen matches, but your match also needs to be tested up to that level for you to see them, let's say. But with that, we try to stress moving forward doing the big Y 700 test when people can afford it, because it not only does it look at 700 or more STRs, actually it's 830 that I usually see roughly, or get resolved per test taker. It also looks at the Y-SNPs, which are really quite important when I'm piecing together these lineages, because it actually puts people definitively on a branch, since they are a type of mutation that's not as volatile as those STRs. So they serve as really strong anchor points up to different various unknown common ancestors. Just to highlight what some of how these work, the Y-STRs, every Y chromosome of every male on the planet could actually be compared to one another. We all have these STRs being humans in certain regions. So say there's this region where we have a GATA repeating, and it repeats 3 times. Well, that STR marker has a value of 3 in that tester. We test another person, again, them being a human, they'll have that same STR marker in the same region on their Y chromosome. We count the number of that exact same marker and they have 4. And then you see another test taker that has 5. Well, you start to compare multiple of these STR markers, and when they're match up between matches and they're identical or near identical, where they have very few differences, again, that indicates a much more recent common ancestor up their father's line. So they're only connected to that match through that line. But this is a fast clock, so I would say it's useful at estimating how closely 2 men match. But again, it's not going to give you the resolution of saying, oh, this is first cousin twice removed. It's still going to be a general ballpark of 100 to 200 years quite easily, even at a Y111 test. But this which brings me into adding also Y-SNPs, which are single nucleotide polymorphisms, and that's just where one letter changes, but they're not as volatile. This STR male, he could have a son and it could go up to 4 repeats, but then they could have several sons, no repeats, and they could drop back down to 3, or it could move up to 5. There's a lot of volatility in these, whereas these single nucleotide polymorphisms, generally they're very stable throughout thousands of years. So this person had an A at this particular location, this highway marker of the Y chromosome. They have a son or a descendant that it switched to a G. Well, now that male is always going to keep passing that G onward. It can flip back to an A, but we're talking about really tiny probabilities of that happening. So these are generally quite stable and are what we use to form haplogroups, haplotrees. So it's a slow clock, but with a big Y 700, we're able to usually identify on average, I would say 1 every 80 years, which could be like every 2 to 4 generations of a male lineage, one of these will occur. With that, when you do have these, we'll have the potential of forming new Y branches, new tendrils on the haplogroup tree. So when you test the big Y on a male, you will get all of the Y-SNPs that are known or have already been identified in family tree DNA's catalog or scientific literature and so forth. But not only that, but it'll discover new ones that formed in that tester. Now that could have formed when the tester was born themselves. It could have formed in their great grandfather or their eighth great grandfather. It's hard to say, but you acquire these private variants again about an average one of every 80 years in a male lineage, or every 3 to 4 generations, let's say. So when we get enough of these private variants identified, and then they start matching another tester, well, that ends up doing what we call forming a new branch, a new digit or tendril off of that Y haplotree. And that new branch represents a more recent common ancestor shared between those two men. And that is, again, definitive. It's not through random chance that they usually form that same SNP at that same location. So it's a very good way of trying to tie in lineages, that brick wall that oh, look, I'm matching this person. We're only matching on that one unique line. So our lineage ties into that lineage beyond our brick walls. But interestingly, we could date it to, let's say, the 1600s or the mid 1500s. We're sort of getting to that level of resolution to some degree. Again, there's variants associated with that. We can't pinpoint exact generations, but it's more information than we have when our documentary trail just runs cold. Again, if you want to see how this looks on the Family Tree DNA platform, I would again encourage you to go back to our catalog of YouTube videos where we've got presentations on that, and I've showed some of these connections, some of these screenshots rather. So how I have the group project organized, and there's ways of always improving this, and I'm always willing to take any recommendations if people are like, oh, what if we group it this way? You know, that would be, I always welcome that sort of input. But the way I have them grouped right now is because group one is so large, they're sort of in their own group. And again, that's just because not only is their branch of the haplotree quite wide, it could be quite deep for some lineages of testers, because there are a great number of sub branches that have formed in this group. And we think, again, given that the McDevitt's joined in with it, and the historical manuscripts say that McDevitt's are generally believed to be a descendant of David or Dochartaigh, who died in 1208 AD. That's sort of why that McDevitt name stuck on that branch, is because Mick is usually son of David O'Doherty, who was said to have died in the historical annals, for example. Well, they end up forming their biggest cluster of testers also under this BY471. So that's generally why we associate it with the progenitor. It's just another indicator that that is the oldest and largest group, which we're seeing with all of the testers that end up piling into that group. With that, I also have group 2, which these, again, are Y SNPs. You don't need to know exactly how they're related, but this M222 is a very popular one, or prolific one, I should say, with Northern Ireland. It's ancestral. So this Y SNP that formed in an unknown ancestor, we think around 100 BC to 100 AD, thereabouts, he is a direct ancestor to this BY471 man. This BY471 man, again, is estimated to have lived around 780 AD. This person around 100 AD. So he's a direct descendant so many generations back. So that's why I base this group 2. They're not BY471, but they're M222. I want to emphasize that a lot of people will call this a Yule-Neal marker, like Nile of the Nine Hostages. I want to just caution, always assuming that, because he's semi-legendary. He may have existed, but it's also older research that did that with YSTRs that didn't have the resolution. And this M222 man would predate this Nile of the Nine Hostages by, oh gosh, probably 300, 400 years or so, maybe further back. So it's often misassociated with that individual. But with that, we have several group 2 subgroups. They're related within their subgroups, but not across their subgroups, because to go across that this M22 individual, we're talking about a time period where surnames weren't being used really. So with that, we have the same thing with this group 3, and this mutation is something that formed, I want to say, 10,000 years back in probably Eastern Europe or the Balkans. We're really not for sure where it formed, but it was well before immigration into Ireland from this group or these descendants. And these people have this marker, but they don't have this M222 marker. And there's several subgroups of Doherty's that we have in the project in that. And then with that, we have other haplogroups as well, A, E, G, I, J. Again, all these groups are related, but you're talking about when you start adding in this group, 50,000 to 100,000 years ago, when some of these groups are converging on the same ancestor. So quite far back. So that's why I explain, in a surname era, are you related or earlier? So that's what I mean by having these groups the way I have them now. I try to focus on grouping people that I estimate are related genetically within the last 500 to 1,000 years. So since 2025, when I last gave this talk about a year ago, we've had not as much growth as I would hope to see. Again, these tend to be a little expensive tests to take, and more often than not, autosomal tests like your family tree DNA or your family finder, I should say, from FTDNA, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe. Those are autosomal tests. They're amazing tests to take. I encourage people to take that if they want to do genealogy research, but they're only easily reliable, I would say, 5 to 8 generations back. They could go back further, but it becomes a nightmare to really confidently have faith in making autosomal connections much earlier than the late 1700s. And it could be quite the rat's nest to disentangle too, because you could be matching that person on any number of lines. Whereas Y-DNA, if you make a match, you're only matching up your father's line, and the same with him. So you know definitively how you're matching. But those tests are more common and more affordable often to take, which indicates why we don't have the quickest growth. But it is still somewhat decent. As 10 new members total that we've seen. So 661 to 671 Y-DNA tested men. 2 of those are what I call a non-Dochartaigh group because they don't have the Doherty surname, but they end up joining the group because it's pretty open to join for free if you DNA test at Family Tree DNA. So they'll join because maybe they have a maternal connection and they just want to be a part of the group and take a look at the results and so forth. So I'll put those men into their own X groups, for example. So we have some of those members that join, but the rest are 7 new testers in the group 1 BY471 group and 1 in the group 3 subgroups. So hopefully we could try to improve those numbers moving forward. And I know that, for example, our board president ordered a new kit yesterday, a big Y, for an Irish Doherty tester. So there's another one to add to the list. The shape, what I mean by the shape of the family, this is all the different groups that we have, just a broad high-level overview. There's 309 Y-DNA tested members in the group 1 Doherty's that are all descended from that BY471 man, that common ancestor that's dated to around 782. And again, this date has no knowledge of who this was, what the Irish manuscripts say. This is an estimate produced by Family Tree DNA just because of knowledge of how these mutation rates work on Y-SNPs and YSTRs. So this entire group one testers, a big bulk of McDevitt men, for example, lots of different Doherty variants. There's 309 of them, and with that, there's 156 of them are big Y tested. And actually, we have more than that even that just haven't joined the group. They might not even have a Doherty surname, and that's why they haven't joined, but they are positive for this BY471. And I think that number is actually, I don't have it listed here, but it's around 190 big Y tests or so, or not big Y tests, but tests that say a man is definitely positive for this SNP. Since that group is so large and quite old, it's got 31 subgroups that I have broken out into it. And those subgroups, I try to break out as far as I can, but without it just getting really wide, I leave men generally in a range clustered together since about 1500 AD. Again, that's an estimate. I don't know, given not knowing everyone's genealogy that deep, if they really are matching that far. That's just looking at the Y mutation rates between those two or more tests. So there's 31 subgroups in group one. We have 6 in group 2. Those, again, all 6 of those aren't related to each other in a surname error. So they're group 2 because they have this M222, but they're negative for this BY471, but they're kind of scattered in different areas of that M222 branch. The largest group, actually, I forget how many testers we have in it, but there's a large group that clusters on this BY169953. Again, that's just the catalog number. You don't. That's when they discovered that SNP, they were just like, "What's the next number in the catalog?" That's what it got assigned. It doesn't mean anything other than that, but only those 10 or so testers that have it, and they share a common ancestor. It's estimated around 1508 CE. Group 3, we actually have a large number of subgroups, but most of these subgroups are the size of 2, like 2 men matching each other. And again, these are all people that have Dohertys that have variants of the surname. It's a quite large group, though, of Doherty testers at 109, with a decent number of big Y tests. But again, not all 17 of these subgroups are matching each other in the surname error. They're matching each other 10,000 years ago at this M269 definitively. So with that, what's left over of these men that have some variant of Dochartaigh in their surname is groups 4 through 9. There's 11 subgroups scattered across these, and we have 49 members and only 17 big Y tests. But that could range from haplogroups of R1A, E, G, I, J. Again, none of them are related to each other, but they are within their own small subgroups. So with that, with some Doherty variant spelling and so forth, we're at 514 men, 224 big Ys, and about 65 subgroups in the project. And again, my goal is to always try to see and grow each of these groups. It doesn't matter if you're group 1, group 5, group 9, and you're haplogroup J. How many Dohertys can we see in this to try to pinpoint, a convergence period in time of when they're sharing a common ancestor? Maybe we could get some clues as to how when the surname came into their line, for example. That would be some interesting information, but it requires, of course, more Y-DNA testing to be done. Again, this is just sort of a brief overview of what I was discussing. We had 10 new members since last year. And this is the majority of those are in group 1, and some of those, I would say a third of those 7 members, all of which were big Y tested, also resulted in a new subgroup. So we went from 30 subgroups to 31. And that's something I'd like to see, is where we get enough of those men matching those private variants, forming those new branches, then you have those new subgroups. And that's bringing things more recent in time from a top down to maybe match up with their bottom up approach of their known genealogy. So we grow that test every year, slowly but surely, by taking as many of these big Y tests as we can. The group one anchor, I will mention this. Again, this is not research that I've done, but they're back in the late 1700s, the Ulster King of Arms recognized a Spanish O'Doherty line as descending from the younger brother of the last Gaelic chieftain, Cahir O'Doherty, which Cahir has, of course, being a Gaelic chieftain, he has his own pedigree stretching back up into the medieval Irish pedigrees. So we've actually tested a couple of these men who converge at a single common ancestor of Ramon O'Doherty, who lived in 1835 to 1902. And their line falls also into that group one, into their own subgroup. Now, they don't tie into any other matches until about 1271 CE in group one. So they descend from this unknown or progenitor, if you want to call it, BY 471 male. And then there's a large cluster of testers that share this Y32988, said to have been around 1270 CE. And then after that, they don't have any other closer matches. But we have a couple of those men tested from that Spanish Doherty group. So theoretically, we have that chieftain line represented in the haplotree as well. The interesting thing, and Will Doherty has done interesting work, or at least collating or gathering some of this information on the O'Doherty website, which you can see o'dohertyassociation.org/SEPS. Is, again, there's instances of where some of these men might have switched their surname definitively or with reason, and one of those cases is McDevitt, son of David O'Doherty, it's believed, who again was a prominent figure who died in 1208. They all cluster together on the Y haplotree at this Y SNP that's descended from 471 again, but they all cluster at 1383 CE. Again, that's a range. Like there's going to be a plus or minus 100 or so years associated with that, if not more. But it's interesting to see them clustering and sharing variants of McDevitt, McDade, and also tying into the larger O'Doherty group. We're seeing that too with some McCaffertys, McBrides, McAllen, which oddly enough gets converted for some of these men to Campbell in some cases. Still not certain on why that is or what the cause is. Will might know more about it, but we see some of these testers also falling under this BY 471. And O'Clery's 16th century genealogies, that again was authored back then, actually give some credence to there being a McCafferty branch of the Dohertys, a McBride branch, and obviously a McDevitt branch. And that's playing out too in the haplotree as well. But again, I want to stress that if someone doesn't fall into those, a McDevitt test, and they fall into like group 3 Dohertys, for example, they're still a part of the clan. It doesn't matter, whatever association or happening occur with the surname or DNA switch. I do want to stress that a Doherty's a Doherty, plain and simple. So that's why I don't want to dishearten anyone of saying like, oh, I didn't match group 1. No, it's still just as important to find out and to use this tool to explore your further genealogy. One thing that I did in my own genealogical research was I identified my brick wall, and I wanted to really characterize what his Y chromosome was to then see my unknown matches, how they relate to him. So you could do this, it takes a little bit of work, but you identify your brick wall ancestor, you do some descendancy research on any of the sons he had, and try to roll it forward all the way to today to find Y testers to target test. I did that, for example, and I've done like 6 big Y tests on people descended from my brick wall ancestor. But it's more beneficial if you could do that with 2 or more sons closest to the brick wall. Because what you're doing is you could see the mutations, the private variants they formed in their line after him, but also the ones that they all share, which means he had it. So in a way, it's like you're almost reaching back and cheek swabbing your brick wall ancestor for his Y DNA. And then you could go on and compare his Y DNA to your next closest matches and sort of get an idea of, well, how close will this lineage match this other lineage outside of our brick walls? So that's essentially the goal of doing that. But it takes a little bit of legwork where you got to recruit distant cousins that are going to probably be strangers to you. And these men were strangers to me, the descendants of son B and C when I descend from A. Because again, this man that we share died in 1808. But with that, we could maybe see our next closest matches. Well, they have known ancestry in Letterkenny or Buncrana. And those are cases I have where my next closest matches beyond my brick wall hail from these regions with known genealogy of theirs. So that's interesting information that we can start to glean out of doing this type of work. Another example I'll quickly go over is like, this isn't a Doherty surname, but I also managed the Milam surname project, and we had 2 descendants or 2 men, early colonial Virginia Milams that most people with the surname in the U.S. today descends from either one. They're believed to be brothers. We might think that they could have been first cousins or somewhat close, but they weren't exactly brothers. But we've done exhaustive big Y testing, and because we were able to characterize with good genealogy some of these ancestors, I was able to come in and test my Milam ancestor, and I quite easily was able to attribute him, given a unique Y SNP, to a certain son of one of these 2 men. So in a way, it did really help fracture a brick wall when I had very weak documented evidence of that ancestor, John Milam's father. He had in a census or basically an old record of where he had a son named John. That John disappeared. We now believe with Y-DNA evidence that he is attributed to, this Rush Milam, for example. So that helped break a brick wall that, again, that Rush Milam, fortunately, and his father, Thomas, was very well categorized by people doing what I mentioned before, testing all these different sons. That work was already done for me, and I was able to come in and just test, and then with a little bit of documentation, attribute John to a specific son. So that can happen, but again, it takes a lot of testing of different lineages over time. This is, for example, like my ancestor was this FT 35833. He matched a very clear cut Y SNP of this Rush Milam. And I tested a number of testers from my John Milam doing that same thing. So we were able to figure that out, and a non-paternity event of this Inyart surname that doesn't have Milam actually tying in as well. Still trying to figure out how he matches John Milam, but he definitely does descend from him. So it's interesting information that could be gleaned out of some of this. So the takeaway with that is that every story needs a willing tester and the legwork to find out who to ask next. And that's usually been my case. But how can we turn these branches into potentially maps is something that interests me as well of Ireland. So we have a gap with our surname project, in my view, of data. Out of our 514 Y-DNA testers, only 50% have estimated, I would say, have a family tree attached to their DNA kit. And only about 1 in 5 have no earliest known ancestor. I'm not a big fan of that. I'll explain why that no earliest known ancestor is not the most helpful thing as a project administrator. But what I've started to do is I've started to go through each of our project members, starting with the test taker, where were they born, and some of them have passed away, unfortunately. Where was then do another line of like their father's details. Where was the father born and died? And then the grandfather. And I know that obviously it's not the most genealogically rigorous, but it's building a pedigree line by line from the test taker up to their earliest known ancestor. It's much more beneficial to me and to the project itself if we have that information. So we have a very strong genetic scaffolding with all these testers, but just like no geography to associate with ancestry. And I think project members can help with that as well. Something we run into with early diaspora genealogy. Let's put it, for example, in my case, again, I'm able to identify through early US genealogy records, my earliest ancestor showing up in a land document in 1796. Some people in Ireland would probably kill for that type of information because usually with what records they have, they more often than not will brick wall in the 1850s, possibly. And it's sometimes very difficult in Ireland to push back earlier than the 1830s. And I see that as the case. Like I'm able to take my lines back that have been based in the U.S. due to land records and a little bit better records, census records, and so forth. A couple generations earlier than a lot of Irish people can take theirs. So it's hard to bridge that gap when we could tend to identify brick walls further back than our Irish matches. But it's still good to have those matches and know some of these Irish connections and where at least their earliest ancestor resided when we start to match them on the Y chromosome. What I want to show here is emphasize is this is what we see and I see as a project administrator is when a person joins, they don't put an earliest known ancestor. You see this blank here. Or if they do put one where it's just John Doherty, born 1859, died 1910. Now, if that project member has no tree attached, that's all that I have to go on. And that's not very helpful. Like you kind of want to know where that John Doherty might have lived, even if you don't know where he was born. If he was born in Ireland, that's at least some more information. Where did he die? If that's really known, that could be even helpful to nearby matches. So that's sort of the thing I'd like to build with understanding pedigrees in detail above and starting at each test taker. So I've started work earlier this year when time allows. I haven't got as far as I would have liked, but on this pedigree index, where privately as an admin, again, I don't want to get into privacy of any test takers, but I'm able to determine from the test taker who their father was and so forth, but it's very slow going. And I've just been doing that in my free time when I have the time. And I even discover that some of these test takers actually have passed away that I'm starting to look at. I've only got as far as 12 lineages and 19 test takers or testers. So that's not as far as I'd like to get, but I want to do this for all groups, not just group one, but every subgroup over time. And that's something where I could then start to associate geography with different ancestral pedigree points in each of these test takers. So maybe they can only go back to a grandfather born in a certain parish, but they have that information genealogically known. Well, what if they're a close Y-DNA match to a diaspora colonial US tester? Well, that's a good indication that there's information to be had there. Like you might not be able to definitively find your immigrant location, but you could start to have a bit more information of what region of Ireland he might have came from with this type of work. So that's why I've been building this index with name, birth, and death years, if that information is known. And even if it's not known, I put kind of a confidence score. And again, this is just for my own personal information as I'm trying to build this type of stuff. But townland, parish, county, if that level of detail is known, even at the US side or Canada or Australia, any type of electoral or religious or whatever geographic boundary is useful. Um, the kit's terminal SNP plus any other mutations they have, that's something I'll try to overlay and apply to the geography of these test takers to get a better idea. And what I mean by this is is a surname map is too broad. Like if you look at surname maps of Doherty's, you'll see usually Donegal, but you'll see a scattering, of different areas of Ireland. Well, it becomes beneficial when you could start to pinpoint certain lineages matching one another. For example, like branch A could be matching and sort of in a source or a point of the earliest known ancestors being associated with this particular region of Ireland, let's say. Branch B could be down in this region. That's interesting information to know for people who don't know Ireland at all, but they're matching those same Y mutations to this group of men. And that would be example branch C or men that haven't yet been able to suss that out. But with more testers and more time, that's a possibility. So if you only do like an YSTR test, it'll just tell you, oh, you're M269. Well, I've mentioned before that ancestor that this mutation formed in lived 10,000 years ago, somewhere in probably Eastern Europe. So that's not that helpful. So that's that produces like a big chunk of Western European men descend from this unknown M269 man. But with higher resolution testing and more testers, results at these higher resolutions being compared, you can start to get a broad signal of using ancestral information between these men. Like some might know they're from a certain area or county, let's say Donegal. That starts to narrow things down. And the more testers you get that are matching those Y mutations and with known ancestry, let's say in Ireland, you could really start to focus in certain areas. Now, it might be still heat mapped around to different points, but that's more or less the goal, is to get enough men to start to match one another that have known ancestry in Ireland and start to build a bit of a heat map to give people who brick wall in the US or in Canada or wherever with their research more to go on of where they might have immigrated from out of. So this is more or less just explaining that sort of deal. Like my case, United States, my earliest known ancestor, just Ireland. That's all I have to go by. Someone in Canada might have Donegal, but no parish, so on and so forth. They hit that records wall. That's it. But then when you start to associate and compare these Y-SNP branches that we're fleshing out, you could tie into at least certain areas to where you could have a couple of Irish testers or testers who recently came out of Ireland, say 100 years ago, definitively know that they came from Ballybrack, Moville, Lower Parish, Inishowen. Well, that's useful information to some of these diaspora individuals, for example. So it's not a proof that their ancestor was born there, but it's a stronger indication when we have a lack of records to go on. So the hotspot's only as good as the data we have, and that again leads back to that pedigree index that I'm trying to build. That I encourage anyone who tests or anyone who has already tested to try to consider passing that along to myself or to any of the association board members. But the independent patrolines aren't testers. But for example, I've tested 6 men, but they all represent one point that's that common ancestor of mine. But what we need is, again, more SNP resolution, so more men doing these type of SNP tests, so we could form these new big Y branches and basically put a finer point on these M269 results that aren't up to snuff, because this represents all of Western Europe. But if we could get down to those finer granularities and start comparing, we could maybe start comparing certain regions of men that they tie into in Ireland. I know that when we're doing this work, we're not going to have always the highest confidence when we get up to the higher levels of their pedigree, so the earliest known ancestor. That's why it's important to have the steps along the way from test taker up to so forth. Because we'll have some men that will put like some testers that will put like some medieval Doherty as their the earliest known ancestor and no tree, and then it's like, yeah, that's not the most helpful. So I would have little confidence in that. So, but I have more confidence when you start at the test taker and work your way up to start attributing some of these mutations to certain geographic regions. So that's essentially the goal of where I'm trying to go with some of the work I'm doing on reorganizing or structuring our project a little bit more. So I'd encourage people to send their direct patriline if they know it's starting at the test taker um, and going to the earliest known ancestor. This includes two Doherty nicknames. If you're living in Ireland, some Dohertys have nicknames, of course, because they're so prolific with that surname that it's like a sub surname, if you will. Um, so rough birth and death years, you might not always know it, especially when you get further back. Birthplaces, same case, but the more granularity, the better. And some information on how you know or you think you know that information. So any type of format works, typed email, screenshot of genealogy software, a GEDCOM file, which is common to export out of any software, even Ancestry. I have a 36 column schema that looks messy that I'll be able to fit that information in. But it's slow going when I'm just trying to do this for every test taker without any input from them as I go. But if you're interested and you haven't tested and but you can't test because it's through a maternal connection, let's say, women can still recruit men that descend from their particular patrilines. It takes a bit of genealogy work, and sometimes you might need to reach quite far back. In my Milam example, that man was a third great grandfather to me, and his daughter is who I descend from, the second great grandmother. I never knew her, of course, that's too far back in time. All the cousins I have through him were complete strangers, but I identified them through genealogy by working downwards and approached them about testing, and they're more often than not, they were happy to do it so long as I was willing to pay for it. But that's how I was able to help solve that brick wall question. But with the pedigrees, I would like to build some of these hot spots. But again, it's not proof, but it just is a more layer of information that I find exciting for me as a diaspora from colonial period into the U.S. So, four
So,
ways that
Zach, could you explain what happened with when Marie compared her testing to the tests that I had? You know, because she tested a male line, her husband's. I didn't necessarily want to give out the names at this point for privacy, but how we found where his ancestry might actually have been not where he's living now.
the recent tests this year that
Yeah.
we are talking about.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah. So, like for example, she tested Big Y test, and Eva had tested three of her Doherty lines, three different Doherty lines that Eva had that she, as far as she knew, were unrelated to one another in a genealogical period. Well, Marie's test taker ended up matching one of Eva's, and because of the Y mutation information, we're able to estimate that it's about 1650 CE that they match. Now, of course, that's going to be beyond their brick walls. It's going to be kind of hard to prove, again, with the state of Irish genealogy records, but they at least know where their brick walls resided in Ireland. And I'm not for sure how close that was geographically, but it does start to form a nexus, let's say, of attributing that Y SNP and Y mutation to that particular region of Ireland. So it's a case that just happened recently, and we were talking about it before we started this presentation. But that's just more information, and that was able to come about by her testing at that level, and oh hey, I match Eva's tester, and they both kind of came from this area, let's say, of Ireland, and that's something we need to follow up on. But the more information we get with these test takers doing that, that's sort of where I want to go with it. So so that does happen, and that's why too it's important, if we can, to always encourage some people who never left Ireland. They might not care about testing uh, because they know they've always been there, but it's interesting when they find out that they might be matching the other Doherty that's across the street that they didn't think they were ever related to. That's a possibility with this. So ways that you can move the project forward to help with that is, of course, if you're an eligible male or you know one, you could recruit one to test. Upgrade. Some people have low-level tests. They might be setting at Y37, 67, or 111. Their sample's already in Houston, so they don't really need to ship a new sample out because they keep it in storage. So they're able to pull it out of storage and run the new tests on it if you ever upgrade. If you do that, of course, I always encourage you to try to send your pedigree information that as I'm building this private database to try to work out attributing these Y-SNP mutations to certain regions of Ireland. In some cases, I might only be able to associate it with at a certain point in time in the US, and then all of a sudden, if you go back another Y haplogroup level, it's like, oh, it matches all of the men in this part of Ireland, So it's a work in progress, but the more information, the better, and having a good pedigree to work off of is quite helpful towards that. Or if you're just generally interested and you don't have any test takers, but you're wanting to help the cause, there's always a way to sponsor kits. I know, for example, Eva has used some donated funds to test 3 and ordered a 4th recently, Irish native Irish test takers that helps with again attributing some of these mutations to certain parishes in Ireland, and she's done that for 3 kits with a 4th on the way. So that's something that we would keep using that for. I think it's a good use is to grow the database also over there as well for anyone that's willing. So with that too, I will also probably try to give a talk. It'll be remotely, but at the Worldwide Clan Gathering, that's going to be August 12th to the 15th. So maybe you could share some more information then. We'll see between now and then. I don't think that we'll have too much more information. It's going to be probably at the level we have now, but maybe I could report an increase in people sharing their pedigrees with their kids, which would be helpful. So yeah, with that sort of wraps up what all I wanted to cover. But I'm happy to take any questions anyone might have.
Zach, there's a couple questions in the comments. Sue posted hers first, says my son has hemochromatosis, maybe, and it is genetically inherited. Have you looked into this mutant gene?
I have not actually. I don't know if you are familiar with it at all, Michael, in terms of affecting. Well, is the question will that affect testing or is, sorry, I'm not seeing the questions.
You're good. And Sue, you could unmute yourself if you'd like to clarify a little bit more. Maybe
So
she's.
it's a genetic condition. It's also called the Irish curse. And my son has a full-blown gene, so he has to have venesections to take iron out of his body. So to be tested for it, it takes 3 months on the NHS to get the results back for the mutant gene. But it's inherited. My husband has is a carrier. My other 2 children are carrier, and I have the full mutant gene as well.
Okay, so it's not something that it's not a gene that's on the Y chromosome, I'm gathering, which there isn't a lot from my knowledge of Y chromosome that would cause issues. I think there are some that do exist, but it wouldn't affect, I wouldn't think, him taking a Y test if that's the question. But I'm not familiar again with
I
what
have
else
done
that
his,
might.
yeah, I have done his wide test. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
not on there, but it is a condition that comes down through the families.
I see. I mean, it, are you curious then if it is attributed to a certain ancestor on the patriline, or what's
Well,
your
it's
concern with it?
it's supposed to be an Irish condition, yeah. So it's very common in Ireland and Scotland. So
Oh,
there,
okay,
so there would be families coming down that have that
I see.
genetic condition coming through the family tree.
I think I had heard of it from another one of our testers said that they had it too. But again, it's not anything associated, as to my knowledge, with the Y chromosome. So I'm not familiar with it in terms of how it would affect or not affect testing for your patrilineal ancestry. But but it sounds like it's an autosomal condition of some sort. I don't know which autosome that would live on, but that's not something I really am that familiar with.
Okay.
Well, and then,
Oh, go ahead.
well, Jim had a question. Jim, do you want to just unmute and share your question? I don't
There we
know.
go. Did I get it?
I think
Can
so.
you hear me, Eva?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, my question is this, Zach. With regard to entering the patrilineal lines, for example, I have genealogical information that others have done in my family working my patriline, but I don't have independent verification of that information. A lot of that information has come to me through books that show some degree of source citation, which I presume to be accurate, but I don't know that because I've not independently verified it. So I guess my question is, if I have something that I feel like is reasonably accurate with respect to the patriline, should I go ahead and enter that for your purposes? Or should I have a fairly high level of sense of accuracy before doing that so as to not throw you off or skew any results?
Right. No, I take for what I'm trying to do, at least getting a good pedigree associated with each kit. I'm willing to accept, if you're not super confident with that, um, especially when you get up to those higher generations back. Like I fully expect that to be the case. But the reason I still might find it valuable is perhaps some other testers claim that they descend from that said brick wall ancestor of yours that you don't have maybe the highest confidence in. And they happen to match you in the right genealogical era, or what am I want to say? Actually, the right Y chromosome dated era of when you would converge, essentially. Well, that helps give some credence to that. Again, it's not absolute proof, but it helps support the case that you do in fact perhaps share those ancestors. I've seen that case a couple of times where we have only what am I want to say? Basically, verbal history. They didn't have actual published literature that showed documentary evidence, but they all claim to be coming from these brothers that matched and came out of this region of near Letterkenny, Ireland. Well, we've had a number of those test takers of these different supposed brothers tests, and sure enough, they are matching at the right time period. We have other cases though where everyone's claiming a particular popular colonial Virginia Doherty, and they don't match unless you go back 5,000 years when they match. So it's fine that if you don't have absolute utmost confidence in every step of your pedigree, I would still be happy to receive that. It's just that a lot of our tests, we just have no information about it. Someone will put in an EKA of a Pat Doherty that born 1790, died something with no location or anything. So that's not that helpful. So it helps to have, starting at the test taker and working their way up to their earliest ancestor. So yeah, anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Zach.
So, and Zach, you're saying that you can't see in the chat the questions, is that right?
I was trying to figure
Yeah,
out how
it's fine.
maybe I stop
Jenny
sharing.
seems to have just a question about Y-DNA and testing and stuff. So it might make more sense, Jenny, if you just ask your question directly.
Well, I've got Irish on my maternal side, and but that's not my question on the Y-DNA. My husband, who's deceased, we have records, and I've talked to Dutch people, and he changed his name in Holland, this guy, but prior, his baptismal record says Aaron Levi, a Jew in Weyer, Germany, but we don't have a surname. So my question is, that was 1700s when he was born, but would it, that's 1200 years in the past, we have that record, but having, say, my brother-in-laws or my son, or it's all male lineage from that man. But would a Y-DNA test really get back to anything more in Germany or wherever the Jewish line went? I just wonder, I don't know that much about the Y-DNA test, really.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you have a direct male descendant of them, like you can't have a female in between generations. It needs to be right. So,
there's not.
so I have tested. I also manage or admin a wolf surname project, and a lot of the testers for that wolf surname project have German ancestry, and they're not actually related. I mean, it's not super surprising given a surname like Wolf. You know, you wouldn't expect that to be a single origin surname. But what I'm finding, and Michael Lacapo might also have information since he's really good with German genealogy research, but I find that there's not a lot of German testers in the database. So it's possible. It's definitely possible, but I wish that we could grow the database in Germany and France, let's say, and so forth, but we just don't have a great representation there. Believe it or not, even though I would like to grow the Irish side of the Doherty database further, Ireland is actually one of the better ones tested if you want to compare it to some place like Germany. It would match, of course. And I think, like, I tested, my maternal line is Christine, which is Kirstein, and comes out of a part of Germany. I tested my uncle's with a big Y, and his next closest match is something like 5,000 years ago, where they converge at a point. So and that's just because I guarantee there are men out there. They're just probably just in Germany, let's say, most of them, or somewhere else in Europe, and they just haven't tested. So yes, it is possible to do it. Now, if you have genealogy of that ancestor, and you could trace down a couple of sons, and you could get like two to test that are at that point. If you're thinking that ancestor, your genealogy to him might not be truly confident, or that he really had all these sons, well, you could test that theory with Y-DNA, because if you test descendants of either son, for example, and they don't match, then something's wrong with that genealogy, or there was a surname switch along the way. But it is definitive in that, again, it's always 100% passed father to son, father to son. So you can, if you know two descendants should be matching at a certain time point and they don't, then something's wrong with one of the lines or the genealogy itself. So yeah, if you have the test takers to do it, it gives you decent information. It's a little harder, I would say, when you are dealing with a culture where the surname's changing. Like I have also some Dutch ancestry. I had an ancestor come over in 1630s in the New Manhattan. Um, Fortunately, his surname sort of seemed to stabilize with one of his sons, but he was changing his name like they often do in the Scandinavian cultures, for example, where um, like what am I want to say? Like you could have someone John someone, and then his son was something Johnson, you know.
Yeah.
The patronymic
Swedish.
names. So,
Yeah.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, all the ones that stayed in Holland, which I have a few connections to, they were all the female daughters of this man that came from Germany, those lines. So they don't, the male lines, all two of them came to America. So that's why I wondered if it'd even be worth it to try to find in Germany and Jewish heritage. They roamed around a lot, so it could be Russia, or somewhere in, the eastern side. But anyway, I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about. I haven't got any takers when I ask anybody to do the Y-DNA test. Nobody wants to do it, the guys. So I don't know. We'll see.
it's usually, it can sometimes be a tough sell. I mean, just anytime you're asking someone to give DNA. I've had good luck, but I usually am careful to explain that it's not as unique as like an autosomal test. An autosomal test will cover all of your autosomes, and you have enough granularity where you could be like two siblings testing. You could see that, it's enough of a unique identity. Whereas Y-DNA tests, if my brother tests or my first cousin tests, they're going to be identical to me. So it's not like I have a super unique identity, and that's because of the slow mutation rates. But it's still helpful when we're starting to get these lineages that are, brick walling 1800s, 1700s, and that it's a little too far for the autosomes to really, parse out the connections to start to match these patrolines together. So when I explain that to some of the testers, and I also explain that I'll buy the test, that usually he convinces them.
I volunteered that, but still haven't gotten a taker yet.
Yeah, I've ran into that too. So it's difficult to sometimes convince someone, especially if they're not interested in genealogy. So I understand.
Yeah.
Well, there is that thing about they say about guys where you need to hit them with a 2x4 to get their attention sometimes, or threaten something that this when a wife threatens to hire some guy to paint the gutters, suddenly he's up on the ladder doing it. So you might have to work on the motivational.
Have to figure that out. Yeah.
I think the Jewish thing is sparked their interest because we're all Protestant that came to America, from Holland. So, but being Jewish, and my son's name, we actually named him Aaron. So this original guy from Germany was Aaron Levi. So, it's kind of an interesting, as I trace back and I talked to people in Holland, communicated on one of the Dutch genealogy sites. But anyway, I'm trying to learn a little bit more so I can explain it better to some of my nephews on the line and my son, and my two brother-in-laws are in their 70s. And so they would be even a closer connection. But anyway, thank you for the information though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Dan,
Levi could be he might not have even had a surname. Could be Levi was a surname. Could be that Levi was just they associated with the group associated with the tribe of Levi or Levitical type of who It could be his father was Levi, and whoever wrote the record just omitted the Ben, Aaron ben Levi. So there's a whole variety of things. Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Dan, you had a question. Now you're muted.
Yeah, I've just come back from a trip to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and I talked about this before about that I was going to do it. Now I'm back. So I followed my family's immigration story from Ireland to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and I went to the pier where they landed in 1809.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so I'm interested in this, and I've said in the chat there that I have this person. He's like two grandfathers back. Well, the grandfather in Ireland, uh, the son William, my great great, left from that farm to come to Canada, and there's a cousin who's still on that farm. Like he's descended from another wife of that same great 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 grandfather. So he's still on the land farming it, with the cows and everything. So um, and I have approached him around the DNA, and I haven't got anything back yet. And he's got some sons, and his brother's got some sons, and so is his sister. So between the
Plenty,
like the
yeah.
8 of them, I think I'm gonna get somebody. I'm just working on it. But my question is, before that, the list it comes from research from the Authority Association, and I know that some of that was um, maybe a bit more hasn't been verified, I would say. And so uh, the previous, so William's father was from the Lagan Valley, so that's a different place. Um, and so, as I'm understanding it, if I can get this DNA from this guy, you might be able to find like some verification of uh,
Well,
the
yeah, and
previous
I
layer, or kind of another area that would be, oh yeah, that's that guy's DNA lines up with this guy with some DNA that we've got over here. Is that some
yeah,
of?
and that's what one of the things we're trying to do is to take research that's been done over the last 45, 50 years and apply the new scientific things that we have available to us. Some of it could have been oral tradition that then got put down on pedigree charts on family group sheets that isn't necessarily truth, and other of it, the oral tradition could be true. So that's one of the benefits that I personally see. I have four Doherty lines, three of which I found as Zach was saying, um, a, a man that's a relative of mine who still carries that name, surname Doherty. One of my lines, I can't find that yet. The people, as far as that I've been able to tell, had daughters, and of course we've talked about it has to be the Y DNA, and as women say to me, well, why can't we take the test? Well, it's because we don't have a Y chromosome, so therefore we can't take the test to get any information. But I still keep hoping that through the autosomal DNA test that I've done, that I'll be able to connect back to someone whose ancestor left Ireland in the 1700s, and they would connect with me, and then we would, and maybe they still have the surname Doherty, and we might be able to then find that that's my fourth Doherty line. So again, it you're right. It was some of this stuff was written down in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s before we even started having computers available really for us for the research. And now we've got the DNA studies that we can do to add to that. So I don't know, Zach, do you want to? That's kind
Yeah,
of
no, if you start to have some of that research that will show like there's different sons of this man, and enough information then that you could bring back those descendants to the present day and test. That's valuable because then you could sort of validate some of that genealogy. Um, if you have, for example, you were saying like you want to see if this man could be attached to, genetically to some others. We kind of have been doing that some, like the example that Eva was talking about with Marie, testing a tester and then matching one of Eva's. They didn't know that they would be related. I don't think, in the 1600s. But now they know that information, so it might be interesting to then again see like where each of the brick walls resided and maybe paint a different picture that they never even knew existed. So yeah, that absolutely. I mean, it's possible that that guy, you know, matches someone in some of these other areas. It's hard to know exactly when you start talking about 1500s, 1600s, where some of these Dohertys were maybe moving up in and out of. I know Ireland's not massive continent, but it's still, I think, beneficial to at least get an idea with the data and with the DNA and so forth and the genealogy and sort of get it all correlated and in line to at least have information together that we never put together before.
So I guess as you start to click the data and you put the pins in the map, then the pattern starts to show up.
Hopefully. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But you won't know until you start doing it, you know. But
Yeah,
that is my hope. Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope to be able to contribute some decisive data.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool. Yeah. And Christine Kavanagh, you had a question?
Hi, I won't put the video on because I'm in Australia and it's 3:30 in the morning, 4 in the morning. So I run the DNA interest group here in WA. So I'm here because I have done 3 Y-DNA tests on my dad, who's a Kavanagh, and my uncle, my mum's second cousin, who's a Sheehan, and the Sheehans are give a very definitive answer that they're all Sheehans from County Cork. And that's, you know, they came to Australia in 1840s and as a convict, so no idea of where they came from. And so that's been really useful. And the Kavanagh came, he was born in 1797 and he, again, a convict, and his native place was Sligo. So we get these hints that we wouldn't be able to get in Ireland, as you say, because the records are too early. But the thing I did was I'm trying to upload everybody so I'm trying to recruit testers. The Kavanagh that came to Australia in 1822, he had a brother. So trying to recruit people is hopeless. But I did get DNA, access to an autosomal DNA kit from my dad's 4th cousin. And so I've uploaded that to Family Tree DNA and got the estimated Y result. Right. And then I uploaded also my brother's to see what that shows. And I'm finding that at least I can confirm that that 4th cousin is on the same line. So I've compared the results. So my dad has got a big Y700, and then my brother comes down sort of 8 steps. His estimated family tree DNA result comes down sort of 8 sort of steps, and then the 4th cousin comes down. It's 24 steps if you're looking at the numbers. So he
right, the haplogroup steps, like
so
the autosomal one is much more further back, of course, is what you're saying.
It is, but at least I've got something out of it because I can't get the man to test.
It's not refuting the theory. It's at least supporting
confirming.
It. Right.
And if he'd actually, and I wonder if it's worth just doing a SNP test, as you say, if he can identify just that SNP even, at least they'll be doing something that doesn't cost it's $600 here on when they're on sale to do a big Y. So
I know. I wish that they would come down in price. I mean, they have some over when I first took mine 10 years ago, but they're still pretty expensive. They used to do single SNP tests. There is another company that will do single SNP tests. It's been a while since I've done one with them, but they would be like $20. Of course, you need to get another DNA sample to do it. But it's called YSeq, WSEQ is the company. But I used to do single SNP tests with them, and they could do any number of ones. Like you could test any of the private variants your father's big Y uncovered, you know, on a new tester for much cheaper. Again, I always emphasize the big Y only because it's sort of just more or less a one and done for people. But you're right, it is super expensive. But if you have a certain goal like that.
Yeah, it's a one and done, but we had on on the Sheehan line, we had someone who had done a 500 test and they upgraded to the 700, and it actually moved them in the tree, so it was well worth doing.
Yeah,
and it allowed, I think, the timeline to be updated. So
it should. The way that they do those time to most recent common ancestor is it's combinations of SNPs and STR mutation rates. And with the big Y 500, because I was at that level and then I upgraded to 700 when they came out with that test, it covers, I want to say 4 to 5 million more locations on the Y chromosome. So with more coverage compared to another more coverage tester, it's just more granularity to provide a more narrowed estimate. Again, there's going to be a range with that. It can never be perfect because we can't always predict exactly what generation a certain Y mutation is going to happen. It's just probabilities. But yes, a 500 to a 700 would give more information to compare.
Yeah. The Kavanagh line is, so we know it's from Sligo. We know the area because his wife was slated to, was recommended to come out to join him. And so we've actually got a parish name that she was at in 1822. So, you know, that finding out where they come from is just amazing, isn't it? It's so difficult.
Yeah.
But the other thing, so I have three. I've done 3 big Y tests, and the other one is a German one, Prussian, an I result, and that's because I discovered my great-grandfather was not the man on the birth certificate. And so finding out anything about that line when you know absolutely nothing is, and DNA is the only thing that solves it. But someone, so don't give up on that because someone has just appeared as a match on the, and so yeah, they are slowly testing perhaps.
Yeah. No, very cool.
Thank you.
Like, yeah, thank you.
I don't see any more questions that we had here in the chat. Are there any other questions that we have? If someone's hesitant to have their question on the recording, I was thinking about stopping the recording because we've been an hour and a half at this point, and then see if there's anything else.
Sorry, I didn't finish my question. I just thought
Oh,
of it.
okay.
So as an admin, Zach, do you find those uploaded kits with those estimates to give you any information or not at all?
The upload kits or what? Sorry, what?
Yeah,
What do
so
you mean?
uploaded kits to Family Tree DNA. So I've
Oh,
got
I see. So
this
autosomal
estimate.
unlocks, like
Yeah, do
where
you
they.
get any benefit out of that as an admin? Do you get any
So
information?
yeah, I mean, it is good to see that they're matching these haplogroups, and it will come down to so I've talked about that or BW 471 mutation that occurred, is dated around 700 AD. It won't come all the way down to that, but it will actually on some of those testers come down a couple levels above it. It is useful information, but I'm not really leveraging it too much and grouping those men. I do want to get into that, but that's sort of lower priority right now. But I still think it is interesting to do that. And I had a case where you're describing what you described happened to uh, a tester I did on 23andMe. 23andMe will, even though it says 23andMe, it's not really exhaustively testing the Y chromosome. They're doing the same thing where they're just getting some Y DNA information out and calling some known haplogroups. It can solve some issues where at least it's not refuting the connection between two men, which is what you were seeing, for example. So I do think it's helpful if like we have two men that were just an upload and they both are said to share this common ancestor and they both on that low resolution, YSNP call from uploading are matching. That's at least some information we could go on. I would still encourage them, of course, to try to, if they can afford it, to test some level of YA test to confirm that connection.
Yeah, I was hoping it might be something that I can use to encourage them as well.
Well, they are. This doesn't help with an upload because they can't do anything about it. But if you buy an autosomal test with family tree DNA. It's now a whole genome well, not a whole genome sequence. An autosomal test on all these companies will test 0.02% of our genome. Very, very little. Family tree DNA is shifted their family finder test now to test 10%. So it's a massive order of magnitude more of your autosomes and even your Y chromosome with that. I haven't yet seen how fine of Y haplogroups they're able to give people, because this is kind of new. But if you do a family finder test now with them, which is $39, it's more obviously in Australia, unfortunately, but they're able to even resolve a finer one. I know that's not always something we could do, because like you, I have testers that are, I only tested at Ancestry, and then I can only upload to places, and so I'm limited by what that Ancestry test gave me.
I might test my brother then. I could do that with my brother, because he's not someone he's too close, and I normally wouldn't bother with doing a big Y with him. But I could certainly do that and see how his
See where it
result
comes out.
changes.
Yeah, I'd be
Yeah,
curious. I'd be curious to know. I mean,
that'd be
actually,
interesting.
I could test my brother and do that, just because it's not that
Yeah, yeah.
expensive of an experiment. But
Yeah, it'd be worth doing, wouldn't it? Just to see what the difference is, because I have uploaded him and have that estimate, and it is
right,
only that 8 steps, like his RZ11, which is quite, it's from quite a lot higher than the
right,
RM269. That is the basic level.
definitely pre-surname era of where it
Yeah, they're
covers.
close. My dad's closest match are Bakers, and they're Americans, and they don't know. There's two of them. They don't know one another, and they go back to the early 1700s to a Captain Baker, I think. And
Huh.
so, yeah, that's quite interesting information, because I mean, the town that is linked to my dad is Ballymote, which is a market town in Sligo, and the feature of it is a giant Norman castle. So, of course, you've got all this movement of people, haven't you?
Yeah,
Anyone could be involved there. So, yeah, when you look at that aspect of it. So, yeah, I think I'll throw my brother in there with a kit. It's a great option. Thank you.
yeah.
It looks
Yep.
like they're also doing a Father's Day sale, and they're $34 US.
Again, that's kind of new stuff. Like, I don't know what they're able to resolve. I'm like, might have to test someone that I wouldn't normally, like she was saying, test, because they're so close. It would be a pointless waste of money to test them like a big Y. But just to see how fine of a resolution they might be able to get, since they're doing so much more of the all the chromosomes. So yeah.
Well, I'll stop the recording and then see if anybody else has any other questions.